They didn't step off the boats with wine glasses or linen tablecloths. What they carried wasn't luxury, it was determination, hunger, and the memory of flavors they refused to leave behind. In the crowded corridors of Ellis Island and on the steam-lined streets of New York, over 2 million Italian immigrants between 1900 and 1910 built something out of nothing. And they started with water, fire, and a handful of flour. Back in southern Italy, the land had turned unforgiving, the taxes relentless, and survival an everyday question. But in lower Manhattan's Little Italy, these families turned poverty into invention and leftovers into legacy. In kitchens the size of closets, meals were stretched with scraps and stirred with hope. And somehow, even in the face of hardship, they created a cuisine that would outlive them and redefine what it meant to be Italian American. This isn't about creamy Alfredo or endless breadsticks. These are the real pasta dishes, the ones that warmed cold nights, filled empty bellies, and reminded families of who they were and where they came from. Each one tells a story, not just of food, but of memory, belonging, and the kind of flavor that only struggle can teach. By the end, you won't just look at pasta differently, you'll feel it differently. Macaroni with tomato and garlic. Before marinara got its name, before pasta sauce came in jars, there was simply macaroni with tomato and garlic. It wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. In early Little Italy, a whisper of oil, some smashed garlic, cloves and crushed tomatoes became the dinner that greeted factory workers and shoeshine boys alike when they returned home, bone-tired but hungry. Mothers cooked over coal stoves, scraping together what little they had. The aroma crept down wooden stairways and into alleyways, mingling with the soot and smoke of the city. There wasn't enough to pile plates high, just enough to remind everyone they were still a family. With no basil, no grated cheese, and no illusions, this dish did what it was supposed to do: feed everyone, even if barely. A chunk of day-old bread mopped up the last red smear at the bottom of a chipped bowl. That meal didn't just nourish, it knit together fading fragments of home, letting one mouthful of macaroni carry the taste of a whole country, thousands of miles away. Ravioli and light tomato sauce. To immigrant families crammed into 3-room flats, ravioli wasn't dinner. It was a sacred event. Reserved for Sundays, holidays, or when an uncle brought home 2 extra coins from the docks, ravioli in light tomato sauce meant something special was about to happen. The dough was rolled by hand, flattened with empty wine bottles, then filled with ricotta or slivers of leftover meat. It said no kitchen was ever too small for 3 generations to craft ravioli together. Grandfathers stirred the sauce slowly, never letting it boil, just letting it whisper, the way memories do. There was no lavish layer of cheese, no heavy cream, just vividity and simplicity. As families gathered around the table, elbows bumping and voices overlapping, the tomato steam rose around them like a spell. For a moment, the outside world vanished. Cold winters, rising rent, the long day's labor, all gone. In that humble red sauce, soft pasta, and borrowed laughter, families found something stronger than comfort. They found belonging. Pasta e fagioli. Say it however you like. Pasta fazool. Pasta e fagioli. In Little Italy, it meant the same thing. Survival that tasted like home. In kitchens where meat was rare and vegetables reused until flavor left them, this dish was a quiet miracle building itself over hours. A pot of beans simmered all day, absorbing every clove of garlic, every onion scrap. When the pasta came in last, just the shortest shapes, sometimes broken ends, it transformed the pot from soup to supper. On cold nights when the wind howled through worn windows, families huddled and circled bowls like campfires. There was no flourished garnish, no fresh herbs, no pretension. Just beans, pasta, boiled love, and a promise. Tomorrow we'll try again. It was thick enough to stick to ribs, simple enough to boil with pennies, soulful enough to make you think, maybe we'll make it. Because when you've got nothing but hope and a handful of beans, pasta e fagioli teaches you this: flavor isn't richness, it's resilience. Penny with garlic and olive oil. When the cupboard inches toward empty but pride still fills the air, penny with garlic and olive oil answers the call. Aglio e olio. It sounds beautiful, and somehow it is, even when made from next to nothing. In Little Italy tenements, they joked that one garlic bulb and 2 fingers of oil could serve an entire building. Oil hissed in the pan, garlic went gold, and spirits rose with the scent alone. No sauce, no meat, just perfection in the honest union of pasta and oil. Each forkful glistened not from fat, but from gratitude. Some nights, that was all there was, but it never felt like giving up. It felt like defiance. You don't need luxury for dignity. Some olive oil, some garlic, and some memory of Naples will do. Because when the world takes everything, penny with garlic and oil gives something back. Not just food, but certainty. We still know who we are. Pasta with anchovy and toasted breadcrumbs. In a world where cheese was a distant memory and meat a monthly wish, flavor had to be clever. Enter pasta with anchovy and toasted breadcrumbs, known in the tenements as the poor man's parmesan. Anchovies were cheap, intense, and magic. Dissolved into oil, they turned invisible, yet left behind a punch of umami no other ingredient could match. Breadcrumbs toasted alongside, golden and crackling, completed the illusion of richness. When tossed with hot pasta, it was like silk laced with crunch, comfort disguised in pan-fried genius. You didn't need anything else. Kids licked the crumbs from their lips like they were at a feast, and mothers served with heads held high. In every gritty bite, there was dignity disguised as dinner, and joy disguised as crumbs. It wasn't expensive, but it was explosive. It didn't scream luxury, but it whispered brilliance. Tortellini in broth. On sharp winter nights that bit beneath coat buttons, nothing thawed the bones faster than a bowl of tortellini floating in golden broth. Steam fogged cracked windows while the tiny rings danced, soft treasures bobbing in liquid warmth. Tortellini came sparingly, crafted sometimes with meat, but more often just with cheese or even vegetables. When bones were begged from the butcher, they were tucked into the pot all day, pulling flavor from marrow and memory. The broth came alive, and the tortellini carried it like little lifeboats. Bows of steam curled up as children slurped and smiled, their cheeks pink, the broth clinging to their lips. Each spoonful was a lullaby sung in a new land. It didn't matter that the meat was meager or the dish simple. What mattered was how long it simmered and how much love was stirred into the pot. Halfway through, you've already tasted the resilience behind humble ingredients. But there's still so much heart and flavor ahead. If one of these dishes brought back a memory, or simply made you hungry, hit that like button and drop a comment below. We'd love to hear, what pasta did your family grow up with? And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story shaped by tradition, hardship, and love. Gnocchi in tomato sauce. When flour was scarce but potatoes were cheap, gnocchi stepped in to save Sunday. In the back kitchens of Little Italy, grandmothers turned sacks of spuds into fluffy dumplings that hit boiling water and emerged like edible sighs. Gnocchi wasn't rushed. It was a ritual, the dough kneaded with patience, pinched and rolled under calloused palms until each little piece looked like it had been shaped by love itself. The sauce? Tomatoes, garlic, maybe a rogue bay leaf or pinch of oregano if luck allowed it. Kids lined up as their mothers spooned the gnocchi into their bowls, steam rising like perfume. It was soft. It was rich. It melted fears. Even on the leanest days, this dish proved that gentleness had power. It taught people that warmth can live in simplicity, and that even an ordinary potato could turn into something worth sharing. Gnocchi didn't just fill stomachs. It filled homes with hope. Stuffed shells with cheese and meat. When Sunday arrived and the apartment swelled with voices and footsteps, it could only mean one thing. Stuffed shells were in the oven. The smell hit you before the door even opened. Garlic, tomatoes, bubbling cheese wrapped around browned meat. It was the scent of celebration, no matter how little there was to celebrate. Ground beef was chopped fine, stretched with breadcrumbs, touched with ricotta, all rolled gently into shells so big and proud they looked like holiday presents. Every pan that went into the oven came out with edges browned and sauce sizzling, ready to turn a small table into a banquet. Neighbors might show up just from the aroma, and somehow, there was always enough to go around. The recipe wasn't grand, but the spirit behind it was. It was a chance to feel full, even if just one night. Not just in the stomach, but in the soul. Fettuccine al burro. Before Alfredo sauce entered cookbooks, there was only fettuccine al burro. To immigrants in cramped apartments, butter was a rare indulgence. So when it graced the plate, it was an act of reverence. They boiled thick ribbons of pasta until just right, then folded them gently into a pan where butter waited, slowly melted to a nutty gold. Sometimes a splash of milk or a shaving of leftover cheese slipped in, but usually it was just butter. That was enough. The simplicity was profound. No distractions. Every bite reminded you how luxury isn't about quantity, it's about intention. When families sat around chipped bowls, they weren't feeding just hunger. They were feeding memory, emotion, tenderness. There wasn't meat or garlic or spice, but a quiet elegance lived in every forkful. Fettuccine al burro whispered truth. That dignity can be dressed in the humblest sauce. Pasta alla norma. On hot New York afternoons, when eggplants were piled high on pushcarts and sweat-lined brows with pride more than heat, pasta alla norma gave Little Italy a breeze from Sicily. It wasn't just a recipe, it was a return ticket to the homeland. Slices of eggplant sizzled in oil, softening into caramelized pillows while tomatoes simmered down to velvet. If cheese was in the kitchen, it was crumbled in. If not, no one blinked, because the real substance came from the eggplant itself, smoky, sweet, sun-kissed. Every pan was a painting, colors of fire and earth. Families gathered as bowls were ladled, the perfume drifting out windows and into memory. It didn't matter whether you were from Catania, Palermo, or Naples. On those days, the smell alone spoke the mother tongue. Because pasta alla norma reminded you, every forkful could be a love letter to where you came from. Orecchietta with greens and garlic. They looked like tiny ears, orecchiette, but they carried big memories. In southern Italy, this pasta came from Puglia. In Little Italy, it came from flour, fingers, and the determination to keep old ways alive. The greens varied: dandelion leaves, turnip tops, even mustard plants growing behind buildings. These weren't market buys but finds, gathered, not purchased, selected with care. Boiled, then sautéed in garlicky oil, they became rich and bitter, bold and beautiful. Mothers taught children to press the dough just right, deep enough to hold the sauce, rough enough to grip every flash of garlic and pepper. Kids wrinkled noses at the bitterness but grew to crave it. Parents smiled, knowing this was more than dinner. It was tradition, disguised as vegetables. This wasn't a recipe to impress. It was one to remember, a soft whisper from Puglia, echoing across foreign streets, promising, "We're still here." Did you know that some Italian immigrants used to cook pasta without tomatoes? Not by choice, but by necessity. Imagine creating an entire meal without a single drop of sauce. Just garlic, oil, and hope. It makes you wonder, what would you cook if all you had were a bulb of garlic and a handful of pasta? Tell us in the comments, what would your survival pasta look like? Pasta with mushrooms and butter. As autumn crept into the city and the leaves began to fall like forgotten letters, the kitchens of Little Italy filled with the earthy warmth of mushroom and butter pasta. There were no forest floors here, no hunters with baskets. So they made do dried mushrooms, soaked back to life, became the secret stars. Their soaking water, dark, fragrant, wasn't thrown out. It was gold. It joined the pan where butter melted slowly, the mushrooms sizzling into softness, releasing a scent that made even silence taste better. When the pasta met the sauce, the whole room changed. It smelled like home, like the hills they'd left behind, like peace in a bowl. No tomatoes, no meat, just flavor pulled from the earth, revived in a Jewish tenement stove. This pasta wasn't festive. It was meditative. It was what you cooked to say, "We made it through one more season." Farfalle with peas and cured pork bits. Spring came with color and with peas. Markets overflowed with green, and farfalle with peas and cured pork bits came to life on stovetops all over Little Italy. There wasn't pancetta. There was no prosciutto, just pork trimmings, ends, edges, bits from the butcher's slab. But fried until crisp, those scraps released a smoky joy. Drop in peas, sweet, bursting, and the dish leapt into something bright, hopeful, and balanced. The pasta, shaped like bow ties, was playful, hearty, beloved by kids, and quietly admired by adults. Each spoonful reminded them that meals didn't have to be indulgent to feel like gifts. The smell drifted alongside open windows. The flavors sang of making do with what you had and making it good. In every bite, there was a lesson. Perfection isn't the point. Sharing is. Spaghetti carbonara. Before restaurants polished it and chefs turned it gourmet, spaghetti carbonara was the food of survival, born from scraps, not style. In the tenement kitchens of Little Italy, it was a working man's reward after another long day of doing more than he had strength for. There was no cream, no flourish, just hot pasta tossed with eggs beaten in mismatched bowls and bits of cured pork from the butcher's bin. When spaghetti was boiled and drained, the heat alone cooked the eggs, forming a silky sauce that clung to every golden strand. Black pepper was joy. The crack and scent cut through the cold. Kids waited with forks ready, watching steam rise like applause. It wasn't celebratory, it was necessary, and yet it felt extraordinary. Each bite told a story. That genius can grow from empty cabinets, and that food, when made with heart, can feel like triumph. One forkful at a time. Pasta puttanesca. Bold, salty, a little wild. Pasta puttanesca didn't whisper, it shouted. And in Little Italy, it was the unapologetic anthem of those who had little but refused to live quietly. Anchovies, garlic, capers, olives, a splash of tomato. All cheap, all powerful, and all capable of turning pasta into an act of defiance. The ingredients went straight into one pot, bubbling over in minutes, perfuming the house with a kind of Mediterranean rebellion. Families laughed as they ate, sauce staining fingers and tablecloths. Nobody cared. That was the point. This meal wasn't for impressing anyone. It was for living fully, even when circumstances said otherwise. Pasta puttanesca didn't just fill you. It reminded you to take up space, to cook loud, to flavor boldly. In a world that often tried to mute immigrant voices, this dish rang out like a declaration. We are still here, and you'll taste it. Macaroni bianco. When the pantry echoed and payday felt like a prayer unmet, families turned to macaroni bianco, a plate of simplicity that told no lies and made no excuses. Pasta without red sauce, stripped to its essence. Garlic, sometimes sliced so thin it seemed transparent, sautéed in oil. Milk if fortune smiled. Butter if not needed somewhere else. No cheese, no herbs. Just flavor from time, from scent, from letting basic things speak. Kids ate without complaint, twirling strands through nothing more than glistening oil. That shine somehow was enough. Moms stirred standing tall, heads high despite the ache in their backs and day behind them. This wasn't a signature dish. It was what they made when the world gave them very little. And they still made it taste like safety. Macaroni bianco didn't smell like luxury. It smelled like love refusing to give up. Baked pasta with seafood. When the harbor winds carried the scent of sea salt into the streets, immigrants hurried to the market to buy the day's discarded treasures. Clams with cracked shells, cheap fish, mussel scraps. And from these forgotten pieces, they created baked pasta with seafood. In cast iron pans, tomatoes became the sea's canvas. Garlic joined in, breadcrumbs crackled on top. And once it came out of the oven, golden-edged and fragrant, it looked and smelled like coastal Italy had stepped into New York. Neighbors came unasked, lured by the aroma. The apartment became a tide pool of laughter, forks clinking like wind chimes. Every bite connected salt air to city soot, the Mediterranean to Mulberry Street. This wasn't just about seafood. It was about resilience, about finding beauty in what others throw away, and serving it hot to people who never stopped deserving more than they had. Pasta with fresh fish and tomato broth. At first light, men walked to the Fulton Fish Market, surrounded by crates, knives, and the briny scent of old oceans. They weren't after fillets. They were after bones, heads, whatever remained. By nightfall, they'd conjure pasta with fresh fish and tomato broth. Those fish scraps simmered for hours, giving everything they had. Garlic and herbs joined the pot. Tomato tinted it red. Thyme made it rich. The smell of salt, fat, and warmth filled the apartment. Bread hit bowls before the pasta even did. Kids dipped eagerly, not waiting. This wasn't just soup, it was a doorway. One slurp, and they could almost hear waves, seagulls, laughter from a town they'd never see again, but still belonged to. There was no shame in the scraps, only pride in making them matter. The broth was thin but bold. It spoke of oceans crossed and roots carried, still alive, still simmering. Peasy with wild herb and garlic sauce. Before anyone bottled pesto or measured herbs in tablespoons, there was something rawer, greener, tougher. Peasy with wild herb and garlic sauce. Peasy was thick, kneaded by hand, and rolled down planks with strong fingers dusted in stolen flour. The sauce? Built from whatever grew in sidewalk cracks and behind brick buildings. Maybe parsley, maybe dandelion, maybe both. Crushed with salt and garlic and oil into a vivid paste that tasted like rebellion. This sauce didn't hide in cream or sugar. It was bitter, assertive, real. When poured over those dense noodles, it didn't just coat them. It revived them. It told a story of the hills of Tuscany and the hunger of today. Each bite snapped with something wild, something ancient, a belief that from weeds, beauty can flourish. That even in exile, flavor and pride finds a way? Straccianati with roasted peppers. Every name for straccianati echoes labor. Dragged pasta, pulled by fingers across wooden boards, shaped with strength more than speed. In Little Italy, where summers baked the sidewalks and sweat marked every shirt, this was the pasta of fire. Peppers flooded the stalls come July. Red, gold, thick-skinned and cheap. The lucky ones were charred over open flames, peels blackening until they slid off to reveal the softness underneath. Mixed with oil, garlic, a few olives if someone had them. It made a sauce that was less a recipe, more a memory. That sauce hugged the straccianati like sunlight catching fingers. It wasn't just filling, it was joyful. In soot-filled kitchens, this plate brought back the warmth of Calabria and Basilicata, the taste of fire mixed with sweetness. Roasted peppers promised something more than flavor. They promised color in a black and gray world. Casarecci with anchovy and herb sauce. Payday was late. Cupboards bare, hunger waiting. And still, casarecci with anchovy and herb sauce appeared on dinner tables like a quiet kind of magic. Casarecci, twisted like rolled-up scrolls, were made for holding on to flavor, and flavor was all they had. Anchovies melted into oil like shadows, transforming from fish into essence, salty, savory, invisible but unforgettable. Parsley, oregano, whatever herb could be begged or borrowed, gave it color and memory. While mothers stirred, they hummed songs from Calabria. The smell drifted down hallways, calling kids home as forks clinked and expectations lowered, but hearts didn't. This pasta wasn't about hunger. It was about improvisation with purpose, scarcity with soul. There was no meat. There was no cheese. Still, nothing tasted like lack. Every bite said, skill feeds you more than money ever could. Bigoli and onion sauce. Onions were cheap, always. And yet, in the hands of loving, patient cooks, they became something soft, sweet, almost sacred. Bigoli and onion sauce was how immigrant mothers turned tears into comfort. Bigoli, thick, grainy strands pressed through hand-cranked machines, acted like sponges for flavor. And onions, sliced until the board wept, cooked low and slow in oil until golden and collapsed, their bitterness gone. No one rushed this dish. Children crowded near stoves, eyes watering not just from smoke but anticipation. When the bigoli met that sauce, it became silk. A dish richer than money could buy, made from sense and silence. Every bite felt heavy, like a deep breath, or closing your eyes after a long day. Because in a bowl of onions and pasta, they found proof. Even what makes you cry can become what heals you. Trophy with pesto-style herb and garlic. Long before store shelves lined up jars labeled pesto, Trophy spun stories of Liguria using whatever grew in reach. Hand-rolled between palms and dried on threadbare cloth, Trophy paired beautifully with what city gardens and wild corners could produce. Basil wasn't always available. Spinach often substituted. Pine nuts were dreams, replaced by crushed bread or nothing at all. Garlic, salt. Olive oil came together with crushed greens into something that sang like the old hills. Sharp, herbal, alive. When the hot pasta tumbled into the bowl, it drank in every drop and every memory. Neighbors knew the smell. Doors opened, plates were passed. There were no fences when food tasted like home. This wasn't about faithful recipes, it was about survival flavored with joy. Trophy with handmade pesto wasn't craft. It was connection. Basta allo scarpariello. They say cobblers in Naples traded shoes for scraps of cheese and tomatoes, thus scarpariello, the shoemaker's pasta. In Little Italy, the legend lived on, scraped into pans by families turning leftovers into luxury. Fresh tomatoes, if you had them, got smashed straight into oil and garlic. Then came the broken cheese, rinds of ricotta salata, hardened hunks of parmesan too small to grate. Stirred with fire and faith, they turned into silk. Bright red sauce, sleek, fiercely alive, spaghetti or penne soaked up the story. And as forks lifted to mouths, eyes closed, not for elegance, but for gratitude. Because somehow, out of pieces no one wanted, came something you never forgot. The shoemakers taught this. Simplicity plus soul equals beauty. Scarpariello more than a meal. A philosophy. A promise that ingenuity tastes far better than wealth ever will. Pasta and vegetable minestrina. Some winters seemed endless. Rent overdue. Pockets turned inside out. And still, families gathered over minestrina. Not quite soup, not quite pasta, but fully love. The broth didn't come from stock boxes. It came from carrot stubs, potato peels, onion ends, whatever hadn't turned. Noodles were the leftovers of leftovers, broken bits saved across days. Nothing picture perfect, everything perfectly used. Into the pot it went, bubbling gently while stories were shared, babies jostled on laps, and steam curled upward like a whispered anthem. Kids called it the poor man's feast, but parents smiled. Knowing the truth, it filled more than stomachs. It warmed fingers numb from cold, and hearts worn thin from worry. If survival had a flavor, it tasted like minestrina, thin but nourishing, soft but strong, always enough, always home. When people think of Italian food today, they imagine overflowing plates, syrupy sauce, melted cheese, indulgence. But in the tenements of early 1900s Little Italy, food wasn't performance. It was preservation. Every bubbling pot, every flicker of garlic in oil, every rolled-out strip of dough was part of something bigger, something built by calloused hands, empty pockets, and full hearts. From macaroni with garlic to minestrina made from scraps, each dish carried their legacy forward. Because in those silent kitchens, surrounded by steam and struggle, families didn't just cook. They created memory. They built belonging. Love wasn't draped in opulence. It was stirred in wooden spoons, shared across chipped plates, kept alive through repetition. Pasta was never the prize. It was the medium. What passed through their hands became a bond, a ritual, a survival thread woven into generations. What they lacked in wealth, they made up for with flavor, grit, and unwavering pride. And maybe that's the real recipe they passed down. Not just flour and water, but fire, flavor, and fierce family. Because somewhere right now another pot's boiling. And as long as it does, their story never ends. They didn't step off the boats with wine glasses or linen tablecloths. What they carried wasn't luxury. It was determination, hunger, and the memory of flavors they refused to leave behind. In the crowded corridors of Ellis Island and on the steam-lined streets of New York, over 2 million Italian immigrants between 1900 and 1910 built something out of nothing. And they started with water, fire, and a handful of flour. Back in southern Italy, the land had turned unforgiving, the taxes relentless, and survival an everyday question. But in lower Manhattan's Little Italy, these families turned poverty into invention and leftovers into legacy. In kitchens the size of closets, meals were stretched with scraps and stirred with hope. And somehow, even in the face of hardship, they created a cuisine that would outlive them and redefine what it meant to be Italian American. This isn't about creamy Alfredo or endless breadsticks. These are the real pasta dishes, the ones that warmed cold nights, filled empty bellies, and reminded families of who they were and where they came from. Each one tells a story, not just of food, but of memory, belonging, and the kind of flavor that only struggle can teach. By the end, you won't just look at pasta differently, you'll feel it differently. Did you know that some Italian immigrants used to cook pasta without tomatoes? Not by choice, but by necessity. Imagine creating an entire meal without a single drop of sauce. Just garlic, oil, and hope. It makes you wonder, what would you cook if all you had were a bulb of garlic and a handful of pasta? Tell us in the comments, what would your survival pasta look like? Halfway through, you've already tasted the resilience behind humble ingredients. But there's still so much heart and flavor ahead. If one of these dishes brought back a memory, or simply made you hungry, hit that like button and drop a comment below. We'd love to hear, what pasta did your family grow up with? And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story shaped by tradition, hardship, and love.